Hello! Welcome to Storytime. I'm Miss Christina from EVPL Central, and I'm so glad that you could join me. Today, we're going to be reading and singing about something that sits on library shelves. Some are big, and some are very little, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. Some have lots of pages, and some only have a few. Do you know what I'm talking about? That's right! Books! How about we start with a song? This is a familiar tune, but I've changed the lyrics just a little bit. You gotta get your clapping hands ready. Are you ready? If you're a reader and you know it, clap your hands. If you're a reader and you know it, clap your hands. If you're a reader and you know it and you really want to show it, if you're a reader and you know it, clap your hands. Let's sing it one more time. If you're a reader and you know it, clap your hands. If you're a reader and you know it, clap your hands. If you're a reader and you know it and you really want to show it, if you're a reader and you know it, clap your hands. All right, how about we start off with a really great book? This book is called The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lesmore by William Joyce. Morris Lesmore loved words. He loved stories. He loved books. His life was a book of his own writing, one orderly page after another. He would open it every morning and write of his joys and sorrows, of all that he knew and everything that he hoped for. But every story has its upsets. One day the sky darkened. The winds blew and blew, till everything Morris knew was scattered, even the words in his book. He didn't know what to do or which way to go, so he began to wander and wander. Then a happy bit of happenstance came his way. Rather than looking down, as had become his habit, Morris Lesmore looked up. Drifting through the sky above him, Morris saw a lovely lady. She was being pulled along by a festive squadron of flying books. Morris wondered if his book could fly, but it couldn't. It would only fall to the ground with a depressing thud. The flying lady knew Morris simply needed a good story, so she sent him her favorite. The book was an amiable fellow and urged Morris to follow him. The book led him to an extraordinary building where many books apparently nested. Morris slowly walked inside and discovered the most mysterious and inviting room he had ever seen. It was filled with the fluttering of countless pages, and Morris could hear the faint chatter of 1,000 different stories, as if each book was whispering an invitation to adventure. Then his new friend flew up to him and landed on his arm. It held itself open, as if hoping to be read. The room rustled to life, and so Morris's life among the books began. Morris tried to keep the books in some sort of order, but they always mixed themselves up. The tragedies needed cheering up and would visit with the comedies. The encyclopedias, weary of facts, would relax with the comic books and fictions. All in all, it was an agreeable jumble. Morris found great satisfaction in caring for the books, gently fixing those with fragile bindings and unfolding the dog-eared pages of others. Sometimes, Morris would become lost in a book and scarcely emerge for days. Morris liked to share the books with others. Sometimes it was a favorite that everyone loved, and other times he found a lonely little volume whose tale was seldom told. "Everyone's story matters," said Morris, and all the books agreed. At night, After all the stories that needed telling had been told and everyone had settled down to their proper places on the shelves, the great big dictionary would get the last word. Zzz, he's snoring. It was then that Morris Lesmore would once again write in his own book. He wrote of his joys and sorrows, all that he knew and everything that he hoped for. The days passed. So did the months. And then years and years. And Morris Lesmore became stooped and crinkly. But the books never changed. Their stories stayed the same. Now his old friends took care of him the way he had once cared for them, and they read themselves to him each night. Then one day, he filled the last page in his book. He looked up and said with a bittersweet sigh, "I guess it's time for me to move on." The books were sorry, but they understood. Morris put on his hat and took his cane. As he went to the door, he turned and smiled, then waved goodbye. "I'll carry you all in here," he said, and pointed to his heart. The books waved their pages, and Morris Lesmore flew away. And as he flew, he changed back to the way he'd been that long ago day when they'd all first met. The books were quiet for a while. Then they noticed that Morris Lesmore had left something behind. "It's his book," said his oldest friend. Inside was Morris's story, all of his joys and sorrows, all that he knew, and everything that he hoped for. Then the books heard a small, expectant sound. There in the doorway was a little girl. She looked around with wonder. Then something fantastic happened. Morris Lesmore's book flew up to her and opened its pages. The girl began to read, and so our story ends as it began, with the opening of a book. The end. Wasn't that a great story? I'm going to hang on to this book and sing another song. If you have a book to grab, you can use it as a prop while we sing along. All right? It's to the tune of Row, Row, Row Your Boat, but it's called Read, Read, Read a Book. So, have you got your books ready? Hold them open like you're reading. All right. Read, read, read a book, travel anywhere. Worldwide you decide, a book can take you there. Read, read, read a book, beginning to the end. What a way to spend the day, a book's a special friend. Thanks for singing with me. Let's read one more story. This story is called How This Book Was Made by Mac Barnett and Adam Rex. Based on a true story. At first, this book wasn't a book. It was an idea. Ideas can come at funny times. When I had the idea for this book, I went to a quiet place and I wrote. I wrote from early in the morning until late at night. It was very hard work. Soon, I had a bunch of words on paper. Those words were a first draft. The first draft of this book was not so good. Neither was the second draft, or the third, or the 12th. But writing lots of drafts is a useful part of the writing process. For instance, when the tiger came back for revenge because I beat him in arm wrestling, I burned these drafts and scared him away. I worked, and with the 21st draft, I was done. So I sent my words to my editor in New York City. An editor tells you what parts of your story are good and what parts you need to fix. She's like a teacher, only she works in a skyscraper and is always eating fancy lunches. My editor called me and said, I love this. This is perfect. Now here are all the things you have to change." And she sent the story back to me. I took some of her advice, and I ignored some of her advice. And then I sent the story back to her. She sent the story right back and asked me why I had ignored some of her advice. I said I didn't think they were good ideas. And she said, "I thought they were great ideas." And I said, "Well, let's agree to disagree." And she said, "Let's agree with me." And I said, "You're not the boss of me." And it went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until most of the United States was crossed out. Many Americans were not happy about this. Eventually, my editor loved all of my words, and I loved all of my words. Even the tiger, who had returned with a posse, loved all of my words. I was finished writing, but this book was still not a book. The words needed pictures. So my editor in New York sent them to an illustrator in Arizona. It took the illustrator a very long time to draw all of the pictures for this book. I don't know what he was doing that whole time, but he must have been working very hard. I sat around and waited. Finally, the illustrator sent all his artwork to New York, and his art and my text sat in a skyscraper, waiting to be printed. Now, the fastest way to get this book to bookstores and libraries would be to print it nearby, in New York or Philadelphia, or maybe even Miami. But this book was printed in Malaysia. Malaysia, where contraptions called printing presses rumble and steam. A lady put the words and the art into one side of the machine, and out the other end came this book. And then another book, and another, thousands and thousands of books. This book was buried below a great pile so tall that you could see it from space. Astronauts looked down at Earth that day and saw a stack of books and the Great Wall of China right next to each other. And they smiled, then floated around a bunch while eating astronaut ice cream. But that's science. This is literature. And at last, this book was ready to be read. It needed to get to the United States as fast as it could. Of course, the fastest way would be to put them on a jet. But this book got put on a boat, a slow boat, took all the books across the sea. The journey was dull until the pirates arrived. The pirates swarmed the boat and quickly overran it. They tied up the crew and stole the captain's keys. The lead buccaneer kicked open the hatch to the ship's hold. The pirates held their breath and imagined their treasure. But there was no gold inside, just books. And pirates don't read, so they sailed away. When this book came into harbor, it was put on a truck. The driver put the truck into gear and drove down the highway. He braked hard for a tiger crossing the road, and this book fell out the back. An eagle swooped down and grabbed this book for her babies. To eat, not to read. Eagles don't read books either. She ripped out a corner, but her chicks didn't like it. They pushed this book out of their nest. This book briefly served as a roof for a toad until it was picked up by a dog that brought it back to its owner, who lost it that night on a bad hand of poker. To a truck driver whose load was one book short. He made his delivery to a woman who put it on a shelf next to many other books. This book waited, and I waited. And the tiger waited, and his posse waited, and the pirates and astronauts and the editor waited, and the illustrator and the old lady and her dog waited, and the truck driver and the angry ink-splattered Americans and the family of eagles and the people in Malaysia. They waited, we all waited, here in this book, which was practically bursting, just waiting for someone to open it. Because a book can have words and pictures and paper and tigers, but a book still isn't a book, not really, until it has a reader. And then you came along. And you read this book through to the very last page. which was how this book was made. The end. Thanks for coming to Storytime. If you'd like to watch more story times or any of the other fun stuff that we've got, check out EVPL's YouTube channel or follow us on social media. See you next time. Bye!